Well, lovely to see everyone. A very, very warm welcome to everyone. Please feel free if you'd like to put anything in the chat, and particularly warm welcome to those who are joining us for the first time or the second time. My name is Hugh Byrne. I'm teacher with the Insight Meditation Community Washington, that the overall kind of sponsor of this class, and then also the Center for Mindful Living, which is under the umbrella of IMCW, but also has a very vibrant life of. We used to be on Wisconsin Avenue when. Before the pandemic and even during the pandemic, but because of COVID, we weren't able to meet there. So we're paying lots of money for rent, like as others may be familiar. And after a while, it's like, you're just pouring money down the drain, as it were. We didn't use the space for a couple of years, so we don't have the physical space, but we have the connections, the online, and now we're doing more things in person, but without having the space. Who knows, we might in the near future get a space again. So welcome everyone. I hope everyone's had a good week and having a good weekend. We're getting a little cold spell here in the DC area, but supposed to warm up this week. And very, very warm welcome to everybody. In recent weeks, actually since about the beginning of the year, I've been kind of talking on a theme of, it's what I call broadly the path of wellness and the path of awakening, and been contrasting, the practices to cultivate well-being, everyday well-being and happiness, freedom from stress and anxiety as much as possible, and distinguishing those from the kind of full range of the Buddha's teachings, the teachings of awakening. And I'm going to continue a little bit with that today, maybe finish off that theme, move into more specific explorations in the weeks ahead. But just a little bit on the format of the class, we begin with a period of meditation, about a 20-minute guided meditation. And then there'll be a talk, normally around 35 minutes or so. Then Emily leads us in some mindful movement. Thank you, as always, Emily, for your role in the class. And then we'll have some time for sharing. Either we do some sharing in the full group and a short meditation to finish. And what we've been doing recently is, if people would like to stay around a little longer, we do some breakout groups. We like to finish at 12 o'clock for the formal class, but people can stay around for another 20, 30 minutes. We can have either small group, break into smaller groups and have some discussion of the theme of the day, what people are working with. Or some general discussion, and that's really just the format for the session. So welcome again, everyone, and we'll begin with a meditation, period of meditation. So I invite you to find a comfortable posture, relaxed, comfortable posture. Sitting, on your chair or on your cushion, or if you prefer lying down, whatever helps you to be here as fully as you can be here. And the invitation is to open to our experience as it is, with kindness, with acceptance, without judgment. Whatever's showing up right now, see if you can make space for it. Sometimes it's difficult material, difficult experiences. Sometimes it's more a sense of ease or well-being. And life will show up, and so our invitation is to meet our experience with a kind, non-judging awareness. So take some moments to settle into your posture. So let the back be straight, maybe inviting the shoulders to relax. Let the hands rest comfortably in the lap or on your knees or on your thighs. You might consciously put aside thoughts, plans for later, plans for the future, thoughts about the past, things going on elsewhere. And let yourself be as fully here as you can be for this period of time. Just share Martha Postlethwaite's poem. Kind of helps to remind me, to come back and be here. She says, do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours alone to sing falls into your open, cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. So if that's a helpful image of just creating a space in the busyness, in the dense forest of our lives, and just coming into awareness of whatever we're experiencing right now. You might find it helpful to take a few longer, deeper breaths to help you arrive as fully as you can here now. Nice deep in-breath, and relaxing, letting go on the out-breath. Imagine you're breathing out any busyness, any stresses, any tension from the day or from the week, just letting it go. Breathing in, calming the body. Breathing out, calming the mind. And letting your breath settle whenever you're ready into its natural rhythm. Breathing in, breathing out. And bring your awareness to your experience right now. Just notice what's present. Notice what's predominant in your experience right now. And see if you can make space for whatever is here. Maybe there's some tightness or tension in the body, or some restlessness. See if you can allow the container of awareness, of mindful awareness, be large enough to hold whatever's here. with kindness, with acceptance. I'll share the Buddha's teachings, his kind of fundamental teachings on mindfulness from 2,500 years ago. He says, the meditator goes to the forest, to the root of a tree, to an empty hut, sits down, having folded their legs crosswise. They set the body erect and establish mindfulness in front of them. Mindful, they breathe in. Mindful, they breathe out. And just this simple awareness of the body breathing. Breathing in, knowing that you're breathing in. Breathing out, knowing that you're breathing out. If you're aware of taking a long in-breath, just be aware of taking a long in-breath. Aware of taking a long out-breath. Just be aware of that. Bringing awareness to the breath just as it is. The Buddha continues, the meditator trains themselves. Breathing in, I experience the whole body. Breathing out, I experience the whole body. So from being aware of the breath, just expanding this awareness to be aware of the whole body breathing. Breathing in, experiencing the whole body. Breathing out, experiencing the whole body. It continues breathing in, calming the whole body. Breathing out, calming the whole body. So inviting a quality of calm into the body as a whole as you breathe in and as you breathe out. So from a simple awareness of the breath, of how it is, to being aware of the body as a whole, and inviting a calming, a relaxing of the body as a whole. So you letting your breathing be an anchor for your awareness, a place to rest your attention, help you to be here now. And letting that awareness be a kind, accepting awareness of whatever is here. And when the mind moves into thought, perhaps planning the future or thinking about the past, daydreaming or worrying, planning, and you become aware of that, just gently and kindly let the attention come back to the body and the breath in the body. Letting your awareness rest in the body, the breath. Coming back and beginning again in any moment. This is from Wu Men, 10,000 flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, the cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If your mind isn't clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. if your mind isn't clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. Making space for whatever is here right now. Can the container of awareness, of compassionate awareness, be large enough to include whatever's arising, whatever's here? This is from Li Po. The birds have vanished into the sky, and now the last cloud drains away. We sit together, the mountain and me, until only the mountain remains. This moment just as it is, this moment without judgment. I'll finish with this poem from Muhyiddin Ibn al-Arabi. There was a time I would reject those who were not of my faith, but now my heart has grown capable of taking on all forms. It is a pasture for gazelles, an abbey for monks, a table for the Torah, Kaaba for the pilgrim. My religion is love. Whichever the route love's caravan shall take, that shall be the path of my faith. My religion is love. Whichever the route love's caravan shall take, that shall be the path of my faith. Taking your time, coming back, opening your eyes, coming back into the group. Again, welcome everyone. If you joined us after the opening, warm welcome to you. I'm going to continue with the talk today, as I mentioned, a kind of continuing the theme that I've been discussing in last couple of months, actually. Been talking about two paths which have a lot in common, but can be seen as kind of distinct goals or paths of our practice. And it's entirely up to each one of us to decide and determine what the goals of our practice are. Nobody can tell you, oh, you should do this or you should do that. No, it's like, but I think it's helpful to have, to make this distinction, what one I've called the path of wellness, which you could think of as incorporating, therapeutic work to alleviate anxiety and stress and depression and, change unhealthy behavior so that we can live more fully with a greater sense of ease and well-being. But, as a number of you are therapists, and there's not a promise in therapy of ending all suffering in one's life, or, promising a complete freedom or nirvana, in this life. I've kind of mentioned, Freud's framing of it, moving to everyday suffering from, whatever his words were of, terrible misfortune, terrible mental states to kind of everyday kind of suffering. Maybe there's more possibilities than that, certainly, but different, certainly, from the Buddha's path of awakening. You can also see, the wonderful work that John Kabat-Zinn and others have done around secular mindfulness. That mindfulness-based stress reduction, which has kind of expanded all around the world now, the 8-week program, and very, very powerful program of lessening stress and anxiety and cultivating greater well-being. But that program and that approach is not, again, it's not kind of pointing to the fullest possible freedom, certainly the Buddha points to, although it's very much based on the Buddha's teachings of mindfulness having its origins there. And there are other approaches to wellness. I spoke probably a month or so ago, or 5 or 6 weeks ago, about, kind of a framework of 8 dimensions of wellness, cultivating wellness on an emotional level and physical and social, occupational, environmental, spiritual, intellectual, kind of getting, I kind of use the image of, putting down a tent, that we need to have the pegs down in all of the corners and the middle, so that, when the winds and the rain come, we'll be able to deal with the weather that arises. And similarly with our internal weather, that we can, if we cultivate healthy physical habits of exercise and nutrition and sleep and all of that, that's going to be very, very supportive for our emotional health and well-being. Obviously, our relationships are going to be really crucial as well to our well-being and happiness. How we relate to our work, how do we cultivate our spiritual life, our intellectual interests, all of this as supportive of well-being. But again, not pointing to, or not having as a goal, the kind of the complete ending of suffering. And I talked about these goals, the path of wellness and the path of awakening, as distinct, but also could be seen as a continuum, that we really need to. You could think of it as needing to work through our traumas and our neuroses and our stresses, on an everyday level, in order to be able to really deepen into the more kind of, you could call it more advanced practices, or maybe there's a better term for it, but more, the fullest range of, I think of it as the fullest range of possibilities of this human life. It's not just about, living an okay life, or having, being able to moderate our stress and our worry. That's really important. But, thinking about, the deepest possible joy, the deepest freedom that's possible in this life, what would that look like? And that's really what the Buddha's teachings are pointing to. And, Ram Dass said, that we need to become somebody in order to become nobody. That we need to develop some healthy sense of self and a healthy sense of well-being in order to be able to let go of any, of identification with self, to be able to find freedom beyond, the limited kind of separate self that we easily identify with. So, possibly, seeing how, if we're really caught up in trauma or stress or anxiety, it's really hard to, as probably many of us here have experienced, it's very hard to practice. It's very hard to open to our experience, to be mindful, to cultivate deeper experiences of joy and a happiness, if we're really caught up in, fight or flight. If we're caught up in stress and worry, the mind gets really fixated, like in tunnel vision. So we need to really be able to kind of establish a good foundation of wellness, I think, in order to deepen our practice, deepen our spiritual practice. I shared the metaphor, the image of a spiral, which I find are really helpful in thinking about, wherever we're setting our goal of, you might think of it in terms of your own sense of what, if you think of your spiritual practice, or you think of your sense of well-being, of what do you aspire to in this life? What do you see as, possibilities of happiness? Is the possibility of ending suffering, of living free of suffering in your life? Is that something that you think of it even as kind of maybe a distant possibility of, like, oh, I can't imagine being free of suffering. But this is what the Buddha's teachings are pointing to, the possibility of ending suffering completely in this life. Doesn't mean ending, we're not going to cease to grow old or get sick or have pain in our body. It doesn't end that. That's part of, necessarily part of this being human. We're going to get sick, we're going to get old. If we live long enough, we'll get old and we'll die. That's part of life. That happened to the Buddha himself and anyone else who's awakened. But we can be free, he says, of the suffering, of unnecessary suffering. We can live life, the fullest possible life of happiness and joy, where we don't experience afflictive states of mind. So even if we're sick, we don't have to be. We don't have to experience that as, as suffering. It can be, yes, physically unpleasant, but it doesn't have to be suffering. It doesn't have to be afflictive. It doesn't have to be, we can experience the pain without the suffering. You've probably heard that expression, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And that really kind of the Buddhist teaching is that suffering is optional, that we have the possibility of ending suffering in this very life, he said. And this metaphor of the spiral thing I find really helpful, because I do in my own life, I have in my own life found myself kind of repeating patterns over and over again, until they're brought into awareness and until I'm able to see clearly my own role in perpetuating these patterns, these cycles of suffering, until I can bring them into awareness, I'm going to keep on, I'm going to keep on repeating them. Probably all of us in our life in some way, whether it's patterns of craving, maybe we've craved different things in our lives, could be sweet things, or it could be alcohol, or it could be cigarettes, or it could be drugs, and how the mind gets really narrowed around having to have these things that they wanted to. I found in my own life at different stages, having come from a culture that was very much for hundreds of years been about drowning one's sorrows, celebrating through drinking, and drowning your sorrows if your team wins or if your team loses, and having to work with that in my own life, and perhaps others here have experienced it, and we can work at it in different ways, but I don't think I've ever got to the place where of alcoholism, but certainly times where I wasn't in a healthy relationship or a particularly skillful relationship with it, and until I was able to bring that into awareness, I would keep kind of in some way. It was like an itch that I had to keep scratching. There was something that I needed to keep going to that well, as it were. And, fortunately, probably 30 some years ago, I was able to kind of look at that more clearly. But many of these things, and it could be around substances, but it can be around so many other things as well. It could be around judging ourselves, self-judgment. We're not good enough. We keep beating ourselves up around, I'm such a failure, I'm this or I'm that. And that can be the way we keep those kind of the cycles going. Could be judging others, blaming others, getting angry with other people, seeing our problems as if that person were different. If only they were different, if only I didn't have to work with that colleague at work or that supervisor or that family member who voted for X or Y, who has these views that I don't like, and that, how we can suffer around that and how we keep these patterns going. And the key is to bring these patterns of these cycles, really, these patterns of suffering into habits of suffering, if you like, into awareness. The Buddha speaks about the cause of suffering as craving, clinging, and when we're able to see our own role in perpetuating our suffering, this is the second noble truth of the Buddhas. First is to experience suffering and say, oh yeah, I'm suffering now. This is unpleasant. This is difficult. This is painful. To acknowledge that, and then to see, well, what is my role in this? And the Buddha says that the cause of suffering is our unhealthy relationship to our experience. We're holding on to something. We're clinging to something. Called it craving. And if we can bring that clinging, that craving into awareness, then we have the possibility of letting go, of breaking out of that cycle of kind of repeating behaviors over and over again. And then when we do that, then the spiral becomes, I think, a virtuous one, that we can move towards deeper levels of freedom and well-being. So I want to kind of look at these patterns of behavior that keep us locked in suffering through two lenses today. The lens of our habits and the lens of karma. They're different from each other in ways that I'll explain, but they have some overlap. A lot of our suffering comes, is habitual in nature. What I'm saying of these kind of cycles of repeating behaviors, where we, we go from relationship to relationship, perhaps looking for something in another person, and then not finding them in that, what we're looking for in that person, and then we find somebody else, but we don't find it there. And maybe after a while, after a lot of repetition, we might say, maybe this problem isn't in the person and their failings. Maybe there's something in me that needs to be looked at. And it may be that we're kind of repeating old patterns. We're looking for something in a person. When what may really be calling for attention is our own. What are we holding on to? What are we clinging to? Wanting somebody to be something for us, for example. So habits are just, in general, we say habits form when we repeat really any behavior or pattern of thinking often enough. You think of putting on a seatbelt when you get in the car, maybe when you were a kid, and over time, then that becomes, begins with an intentional action that typically results in a reward. Often it's a release of dopamine. And what happens is with sufficient repetition, the behavior becomes automatic and unconscious. It actually it's controlled by a different brain process than intentional actions. Intentional actions are very much under the auspices, as it were, of the prefrontal cortex. But once something becomes habitual, it's the older part of the brain, that takes over. This is something that, with repetition, the behavior becomes automatic and unconscious. And it's the brain's way of being efficient and simplifying things and saving energy. So we don't have to keep, reinventing the wheel. We don't have to, each time we walk across the room, we don't have to say, oh, how do? I have to lift one foot and put it, move forward and then lean forward and then move the other. The pattern has been set up, the habit has been set up, and then it becomes automatic and unconscious. And this has evolutionary benefits. Charles Duhigg, who wrote the book, The Power of Habit, really good book, he speaks about how he explains habits as the brain's way of conserving energy, allowing our minds to ramp down more often. And he points to the evolutionary benefits. He says, an efficient brain requires less room, which makes for a smaller head, which makes childbirth easier, and therefore causes fewer infant and mother deaths. An efficient brain also allows us to stop thinking constantly about basic behaviors, such as walking and choosing what to eat. So we can devote mental energy to inventing spears, irrigation systems, and eventually airplanes and video games. So habits have an evolutionary benefit and to us. And the same process applies to both healthy and unhealthy, healthy and beneficial habits like meditating, exercising, eating healthily, and to unhealthy ones like being caught up in stressful, anxious thinking or taking drugs or drinking. It's the same brain processes that get activated. It's the automatic older part of the brain. And it's not, the brain isn't making moral judgments at that time. It's kind of like, oh, this gives me a reward. I'm going to keep on doing this. And after a while, we'll keep on doing it. So just as an example, maybe when we were young, very young, we didn't get the love and care and affection that we needed. And maybe we used food to comfort ourselves, soothe ourselves. And this may have been quite functional at the time. We need to feel loved and cared for. And if we're not getting it from somewhere else, then maybe that's a good enough way of getting it at that time. But over time, it can become, a habit. And it cannot, maybe can follow us into later life with negative consequences. Whenever we feel lonely or anxious or abandoned or sad, we might comfort ourselves still with food or with sweets or with other substances or behaviors like drink or drugs or sex or shopping. And then these behaviors become habitual, they become automatic and unconscious, and then they become hard to change. They go off of our radar screen. So in order to free ourselves from these unhelpful, unhealthy, or unwanted habits, we need to bring the behavior into awareness. And then we can choose a more helpful, healthy response. We can move from the older part of the brain that's reacting automatically to the prefrontal cortex, and we can say, okay, I'm aware that I'm doing this. I'm aware it's not helping me in the long run. It's not good for my overall well-being. I can see this. And if I stay with my experience right now, then I can choose to move in a different direction, choose a more helpful response. So Viktor Frankl famously said, between the stimulus and the response is a space. In that space lies our ability to choose. And in our ability to choose lies our growth and our freedom. So if we can come into that space of awareness where we say, okay, rather than doing what I keep doing habitually that keeps getting me into trouble, I can actually stay. I can breathe, I can pause, I can stop, bring awareness to my experience. And then I can find that space of choice. And I can make a better choice rather than a worse choice, a choice that leads to growth and leads to freedom. I often share Jung's saying that what is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. What is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. If we don't bring our unconscious behaviors into awareness, we will keep playing them out over and over again. We'll keep going round and round, and we'll keep digging, and we'll be expecting different results, but we'll keep getting the same result, because we're not bringing what needs to be brought into awareness. In the Buddha's teachings, it's being aware of the cause of suffering, being aware of where our clinging is, what we're holding on to. And the way out of suffering is to be willing to be with the suffering. The Ajahn Chah says there's two kinds of suffering. There's a suffering that leads to more suffering, and the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. The suffering that leads to more suffering is when we keep doing the thing that is leading us to suffering, like we keep taking the drug, thinking that we're going to get happiness from that, but it's actually only making us more addicted, more leading to more craving. We think that, judging ourselves will make us in some way a better person, but the more we judge, the more judgmental we become, and the more that pattern gets set up. The more anxious we are, we think, oh, something's going to go wrong, and we keep thinking those anxious thoughts. Then we become more and more anxious, more and more fearful. So we keep creating the conditions for more suffering. And Ajahn Chah says that the suffering that leads to the end of suffering is when we're willing to be with our experience as it is, to bring awareness to it, to stay with what's difficult, to stay with what's unpleasant, and then to choose a wiser, more helpful response. I like the image of a circle with a line down the middle, and what's unconscious is below the line. And if we don't bring awareness to what's unconscious, we will, as Jung says, we'll tend to be governed, ruled by our unconscious minds rather than by our conscious minds, by our choice, by our values, by choosing what will lead to genuine happiness and freedom. We have to bring it into awareness. We have to bring things above the line. We have to bring what is unconscious above the line. So this is really the key to ending suffering in our lives. The key to is the Buddha's third noble truth. It's being willing to stay with the unpleasantness, with the difficulty, in order to be able to find our way out of it. As they say, the way out is through. The way out is through. It's through being willing to stay with, the Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Pema Chodron. I've shared this with, she has the image, the Tibetan word Shenpa, SHENPA, which means it's like being hooked. We're hooked. And until we're willing to be with the urge, with the craving, then we're going to keep staying, we'll remain hooked. We'll keep going round and round until we're willing to, look at ourselves honestly, truthfully. Take refuge, the Buddha said, take refuge in the truth. Take refuge in the truth of our experience. Be willing to turn the spotlight inward on ourselves and say, if I'm suffering now, what is my role in this suffering? What am I holding on to? What am I clinging to here? And to be willing to be with the unpleasantness, with the difficulty. We can also look at this cycle through the lens of karma. There's a lot of confusion about karma, as though, karma is some kind of predestination, or I do something bad and a tree will fall on my head kind of thing. But, it's really about, sowing seeds. If we sow healthy seeds, we'll have healthy crops. If we sow seeds that, in places where they're not going to, flourish, then, we're not going to get the results that we want. Karma is really rooted in our intentions. And it's the intentions behind our actions that matter, that create the moral consequences. So when we act based on wise, skillful, kind intentions, then intentions of kindness, generosity, goodwill, etc., it will have beneficial outcomes. It will definitely have outcomes in terms of our inner life. If you cultivate compassion, we'll experience life more compassionately. We cultivate loving kindness, we will become more loving. We cultivate generosity, we will become more generous. It's a habit, but it's like intentionally creating the conditions for beneficial outcomes in the future. Conversely, if we cultivate anger, hatred, greed, that's what's going to fill our hearts and minds. We can see people, in the world who have clearly cultivated hatred towards others. They've created stories about other people and how they're different and how they're less than we are. And then when we do that, we create this, this world out of our intentions, out of our ill will, hatred, greed, ignorance. We're sowing harmful seeds for the future. So really our happiness and well-being, as the Buddha says, comes from the seeds that we sow, comes from training the mind to move in directions and towards actions and towards words and towards livelihood that lead to our own well-being and the well-being of others, and to incline our mind away from behaviors and words and ways of living that lead to harm to others, to ourselves, to others. And so the way we work with harmful patterns that cause us suffering is, again, to bring them into awareness. This is the key to creating wholesome outcomes for the future. Mingyur Rinpoche, another Tibetan Buddhist teacher, said ultimately our happiness depends on choosing between the discomfort of being aware of our mental afflictions and the discomfort of being ruled by them. So in either case, just as Ajahn Chah spoke about two kinds of suffering. So two kinds of discomfort, the discomfort that leads to more suffering and the discomfort that leads to the end of suffering. The key is the willingness to be with our experience, to look at it in the face, and to be willing to stay with the difficult experiences, the unpleasant experiences, to expand, as they say in psychology, our window of tolerance for difficult experiences, for painful or unpleasant experiences. When we can do that, we can see that everything stays for a while. Nothing lasts forever. Even very powerful emotions, they last for a minute or two. I think the science says, something like that, It may be difficult, but we can train the mind to ride the waves, to be able to go, they don't last forever. Maybe they're very intense, and then we come back down, and then we go away for a while. And, but as we open to our experience, the waves will tend to settle over time. We can learn to be with our experience. There was there's a short sutta that I like a lot of a Brahmin who comes to the Buddha, and he asks the Buddha a question. He says, a tangle within, a tangle without. People everywhere are tangled in a tangle. Master Gautama, that's a Buddha, he said, I ask you this, who can untangle this tangle? And, I think that this metaphor of being tangled, our suffering is very much, I think I very easily experiences it as a tangle. We're caught up. We want things to be different, but they're the way they are. And how do we get out of this tangle? And the Buddha replies, a person established in integrity, developing discernment and mindfulness, ardent and clear, they can untangle this tangle. Those whose passions, aversions, and ignorance have faded away, for them the tangle's untangled. So basically, the Buddha is saying, if we train our minds in mindfulness and wise living, ethical living, cultivate wisdom, let go of greed, hatred, aversion, delusion, then we can untangle the tangle of our lives. And this is the possibility of the Buddha's path of awakening, that we can untangle the tangles, that we can become unhooked. We can get unhooked. We can unhook ourselves from suffering. I want to finish with an experience that I had. It was kind of like, in some ways, a bit of a humbling experience, but one that I'm very curious about and interested in. And I'll share this story. My dad died when I was fairly young. I was a young adult. He died 40 years ago, and we had a difficult relationship, particularly in the last years of his life. We were in a lot of struggle. I think he probably saw me making the same mistakes in my life as he'd made, and was was angry with me, or but we weren't getting on well. And I also learned things about his life that I felt were kind of mistakes that he'd made and things that he'd done that really affected our family, and affected relationship with my mother. And I won't go into the details about that, but after he died, I have definitely fondness for him, but I looked at him through the lens of judgment and criticism. I think for decades I would look at him and I would, I'd see him through, what I thought of as the mistakes that he'd made. And so, over the years, I kind of understood that this was probably not helpful to me to look at him through that particular lens or that way of looking. And yet I continued to do that over the years and over the decades. And recently, I chose to kind of look at that more closely. And, I sometimes I lie awake, often it's in the morning, sometimes at night. But it's not in an anxious state, but in a kind of a state between awaking and sleeping. And I kind of invited him into my awareness, and my mother as well, who I had a much easier and kind of very grateful, loving relationship with. But I invited him into my awareness, and I said to him, I happened over a couple of nights. I said, I don't want to keep on holding on to judgment and criticism. I want to let it go. And I kind of had a conversation with him, and I felt really, I was kind of like, I don't want to hold on to anything anymore. I don't feel it's helpful for me. And I want to be in a, in whatever way, whatever realm he might be in right now. And I want to be in a, be able to think of you in a loving and a caring way. And there's definitely, parts of my childhood, but very much that. And I want to let that go. And I felt that in that, doing that, I was able, and I don't mean as a done deal, I think it's an ongoing thing, but I felt really a healing process in kind of wanting to say that and making a commitment to to letting go of anything I was holding on to about judgment and blame and criticism. And I was able to, with my son, who we've had our challenges in terms of our relationship over the years. And I think there's been a judgment on both sides in that. And I said to him when he came to visit recently, I wanted to, apologize to him for any kind of failings I'd had as a parent and acknowledge, the limitations of, of being a parent, my being a parent, and kind of let that go, and to have that wasn't coming from a place of self-flagellation or self-judgment, but just trying to be as truthful as I could be. And I felt that was really healing as well. And I share this as just as an example of just a kind of a cycle that I had kept going over many, many years. And in some way, it had been baggage for me that I'd been carrying around with me, that I feel now, even though this is still fairly recent, I feel much freer of having put down that baggage, in having kind of said, I don't need that anymore. And to be able to look at my dad and think of my dad in a different kind of way, of like, in a more from a standpoint of, friendship and compassion and kindness and love, rather than through the lens of judgment and criticism and that kind of thing. And so I share that and, wonder, and I ask myself, why did I keep it going so long? So that's an ongoing exploration. But maybe just things need to happen at the right time, and sometimes they take a long time to come to fruition. But what I do feel is, coming back to this idea of a spiral, that in that letting go, or that this process of letting go, because I definitely see it as a process, it raises the question to me of what other areas of my life am I continuing to hold on to something in, where there's still some holding, some clinging that I could let go of to deepen freedom in my life. So I leave with that, question for you, for everyone here, what is it in your life, if anything, that is sticky, that feels like it could use some investigation, being brought into awareness with compassion and kindness, and with the possibility of perhaps of letting go? So maybe what we'll do, because I went on a little bit longer here, but what we'll do is Emily will lead us in some movement. We'll have a short meditation and some announcements to finish. And those who'd like to, we can stay around and maybe do some sharing in small groups and in the full group. So thank you for your kind attention today. I hope hope there's something helpful in that, in those reflections. Anything that's not helpful, leave on your cushion. And Emily, thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Let me invite you to stand up and sweat. Just feel your feet on the floor, your connection to the earth through our feet, and allow it to rise up as you become aware of your arms, your skin, the way the breeze is against your hands. And then open up wide, expanding, lifting up, reaching, and soften your shoulders. Bend your elbows, clasp your left wrist, extend out to the left, just shifting your left hip out, bending. You could always come up and reset. Whatever works here in this moment. And then breathe into that left rib cage. Exhale, soften. And then inhale, grasp the right wrist and extend out to the left. Just you're holding the right wrist with your left hand, being in the moment. And resetting, if you'd like to, just to shift down, soften your shoulders. And then inhale up, float your arms down, roll your shoulders independently. Having your own dance in this moment, being conscious. And then the other way. And then let's take a moment to tap, just tapping on the top of your skull, this place where you hold so much energy, your habits, or maybe that's in the back. But anyway, we'll just tap on the top, moving around the sides of your head, tapping, and then down the sides of your face or head, down to your jawline, where a lot of tension can be held, and then down your throat to your chest, holding here. You could thump, you could slap, whatever works. And then take your right hand and clap yourself on the shoulder, left shoulder, and move slowly along, over, underneath, just being, again, very conscious, the energy inside your arm. Back up, clapping yourself on the shoulder, and then cross over to the other shoulder with the other hand. Tapping, awareness here. Even on the fingers, your palm, underneath. Being in the moment with your attention. Back to the chest. And then drop your hands down just for one moment. Keeping your eyes open for focus and balance, or shutting them, whatever. Shutting them would turn your attention inward. Taking a breath in, exhaling slowly and deeply. And then let's go into a forward fold, hands above the knees, coming into a flat back. So here you feel the strength in your feet, the support of your legs. You might even think about your hips going beyond your heels, bending at the hip crease. Keeping the weight of your body here in a straight line, and keep bending at the hip crease, and lower your head, your shoulders, wherever it feels good, to lengthen your spine, keeping that bend in your hip crease, supporting yourself. If you'd like to, just to be in the moment with your body in an inversion. The head lower than the heart, if you'd like to. And then slowly lift your hands back above your knees, tuck under your tailbone. Start to stack your vertebrae, lifting up, shoulders up around your ears. And then lift your hands above your head, extending out, softening down, coming into cactus pose. Bit of work here, not work, fun. Exhale, drop your hands down, leaving the elbows up. Rise up. Exhale, down. Rising up. Exhale, down. Rising up. Extend your arms out. Flip your left palm up. Keep the right down and on. And inhale, switch. Back to the left. Back to the right. Last time to the left. To the right. Drop your arms down. Roll your shoulders. Together. And roll them the other way. And then come to center and draw your arms up, placing your hands together above your head, feeling just a center line through your body. And then exhale your hands down to your heart and bow. Take a bow to everyone here. Thank you so much for this moment.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Beautiful. So we'll take a few minutes to meditate to finish off and have some announcements, and then we'll do a little sharing if for those who would like to stay for some discussion and sharing after 12. So let your attention come inward. Just feel how it is now that you had a chance to do some movement and feel the different areas of the body and stretch. Just letting yourself settle. Letting your awareness come to your breathing. Appreciating the effort that you made to be here today, to practice, to reflect and explore your experience. And appreciate everyone else who's here, how we support each other in our practice. This gift of community, of Sangha. The Buddha said all of spiritual practice is Sangha, community. Holding whatever is present right now for you with kindness, with acceptance. As we move towards finishing today, you might just reflect on any intention you might have for perhaps for the week ahead or the time ahead. Is there anything that you feel would be helpful to cultivate or to practice, bring awareness to? anything that may be unexplored or not sufficiently explored that might be causing some difficulty, some suffering for you. And that maybe to ground yourself in an intention to explore this, to bring it into awareness, to be willing to stay with what may not feel easy to stay with. Finish with this from Diane Ackerman, School Prayer. In the name of the daybreak and the eyelids of morning, and the wayfaring moon, and the night when it departs, I swear I will not dishonor my soul with hatred, but offer myself humbly as a guardian of nature, as a healer of misery, as a messenger of wonder, as an architect of peace. In the name of the sun and its mirrors, and the day that embraces it, and the cloud veils drawn over it, and the uttermost night, and the male and the female, and the plants bursting with seed, and the crowning seasons of the firefly and the apple. I will honor all life, wherever and in whatever form it may dwell, on earth my home, and in the mansions of the stars. So we'll finish with some announcements. I'll just mention a couple of things. One, I'm teaching a retreat. Rebecca and I are teaching a retreat up at Kripalu in the middle of April. So if you're it's on a retreat on mindfulness, loving kindness, and poetry. April 14th to 16th. So if you're interested at Kripalu, you find that on my website and or on Kripalu's website. Also mention there's no cost for joining the class. You're invited, if you're able and inclined to do so, to make a donation. Donations help to support, in this case, the teacher, helps to support IMCW, and it's how the teachings have come down through 2,500 years through the tradition of dana, D-A-N-A, or generosity. So thank you for your kindness and support. You'll get some links there for how to make donations if you choose to do so.